Hey everyone, and welcome to the first meeting of the Higher Education Power BI User Group. The first thing I want to address is why create this user group for Power BI users in higher education. And it happened because I was at a conference, the AIR Forum in Cleveland this past year. I was giving a presentation with Laura Boyles, my colleague here at Davidson, and there was a lot of interest in Power BI that I discovered through the conference application. And I met up with a couple of people and talked about Power BI with them for a few hours. And I got the sense that there was a lot of interest there, but maybe not a lot of organization around bringing higher ed users in Power BI together to talk about our platform. And especially picked up on, there are a lot of schools that are transitioning to Power BI who could benefit from some experience from those of us who have been using Power BI for several years. So I thought that I would try to put together a user group where we could share projects that we're working on, the knowledge that we've acquired, and have some opportunities to collaborate with each other, different schools, coming together, talking about Power BI, meeting up at conferences, and generally kind of sharing the gospel, sharing the Power BI gospel with whoever will listen. So that's why I created this group. I'm very happy to have a really strong showing, 72 people on our first meeting. So that's really exciting, and hopefully we can continue to improve upon that. The mission of the group, I kind of wrote up a quick mission statement, is to train, educate, and connect data professionals who work with Microsoft Power BI at colleges and universities. And that's not limited to just Power BI necessarily. Those of you who have heard about Microsoft Fabric may be curious about how Fabric intersects with Power BI, and that could also be a topic for conversation in this particular group. And at the same time, I don't want to necessarily prejudice ourselves against other products like Tableau. As a matter of fact, I just spoke yesterday at the Higher Education Tableau user group, thanks to an invitation from someone who's in this meeting with us today. And I was overwhelmed by the positive reception from the Tableau users, and I'd like to leave the door open to inviting Tableau people as well to talk about their platform, or maybe institutions who use it, Looker or Alteryx or other platforms. So my vision for the future of this group, monthly virtual meetings like the one that you're in right now, possibly some in-person meetups at conferences in the future. So EDUCAUSE, AIR Forum, the HEDW Higher Education Data Warehousing Conference. These are all great examples of events where Power BI professionals can meet up and share some of our knowledge. So if anyone is interested in doing a meetup, this is a potential way to facilitate that. And at the same time, if anyone, I'll go ahead and put this out there, if anyone's interested in collaborating on a presentation at one of these conferences, let us know. I'm already talking with someone about collaborating on a presentation at AIR Forum in Denver, Colorado this coming May. So lots of potential meetups that could happen. And I'd also like to get some active participation from the group. Volunteer to speak. Is there something that you're doing at your institution with Power BI that you think people would be interested in? Did you create an interactive fact file with Power BI? Or did you solve a particularly pernicious problem with Banner or Genzabar with Power BI? Just a couple of examples. And then, as I mentioned earlier, collaborating with other institutions. I'd really like to see colleges and universities, community colleges and others coming together and doing, generating content within the context of this group, doing presentations. So I'm actually going to have some links to share with everyone as part of this later in the presentation so that you can volunteer to speak at one of these meetings, or you can submit ideas for topics or speakers that you'd like to see at a monthly user group meeting. And then we're getting some questions about the SACSOC annual meeting. Okay, yeah. And a question about, can we poll which ERP platforms everyone's using? Yes, I thought about doing that. I actually had a request from someone at Davidson to do a poll of which SIS and HR and ERP platforms people are using. I don't have that ready today, but what I will do is after this meeting, I'm going to send out a post-meeting poll to all of the users, and I'll try to gather that information and I'll share it with everyone because I think that would be really valuable to everyone who's on the call. I typically start these meetings at Davidson with a quick overview of where we are with Power BI versions right now. So if you are using the Power BI service, which is the cloud version of Power BI, the latest version is September 2023, which just came out a few days ago. And if you need to download the latest version of Power BI Desktop, you can do so by going to the link in the top half of the screen, which is aka.ms/PBI single installer. If you're using Power BI Report Server, which is the on-premises version, then you can rely on the May 2023 version of Power BI Desktop optimized for Report Server. And if you're not familiar, Power BI Report Server and Power BI Service do have separate Power BI Desktop applications. One of them is optimized for the on-premises Report Server. So if you are a hybrid institution, like Davidson is, you will find yourself perhaps installing two different versions of Power BI Desktop on your machine. And I just always put this slide up to let people know, here's where we are. We're at September 2023 for the cloud and May 2023 for Report Server. We should be getting a new Power BI Report Server version any day now. They typically happen every 4 months in May, September, and January. So we'll transition to the main event in a moment, but I'd like to also take a moment to do announcements. This is something that the Tableau user group was doing yesterday, and I thought that this was a good little format to follow. So I'm going to do a quick announcement that someone asked me to publicize. We have someone in EDUCAUSE asked me to point out that the Center for College Effectiveness at Gutman Community College in New York City is seeking a senior IR data analyst specializing in SQL, data dashboards, business intelligence, Power BI, and quantitative analysis and reporting. So I might circulate that link to this whole group later so that people can, if anyone's interested in looking at that job posting, I will make that available. And at this point, what I'd like to do is I'm going to give people the ability to take themselves off of mute. And if you have any announcements that you would like to make, please go ahead and unmute yourself and let us know your announcement. Okay, not hearing any announcements then, I'm going to proceed to the next part of our presentation, which is going to be myself and my colleague Laura Boyles. We are going to give a little talk about, let me bring up the PowerPoint and turn that on. We're going to talk about our project to model the further education of graduates using National Student Clearinghouse data in Power BI. This is actually a talk that Laura and I gave at the AIR Forum in Cleveland just a few months ago. And the reason I want to give this talk is, number one, it should resonate with most everyone in this meeting, especially the institutional research professionals who probably work with NSC data a lot. The other main reason I want to give this talk is because it demonstrates, for those of you who are Power BI beginners and rookies and neophytes and all that, it demonstrates some of the features of Power BI and a particular pattern that you can use to ingest data from a data source, one that's relevant to most, if not all of us in this meeting, create a data model, and then build what we call an app-like user experience in a Power BI report. So this is a really good kind of demonstration of, from soup to nuts, as they say, of getting a project idea and then taking it from ideation all the way to completion, partnering both Davidson's institutional research shop in the form of Laura Boyles and the central IT shop in the form of myself. So, Laura, are you able to unmute and begin our presentation?
I am.
All right, well, let's head right on in to our first slide.
All right, very good. Welcome, and I'm glad there are so many of you here. Just a little bit of an overview about Davidson and the college. We are just 20 miles north of Charlotte, and we were founded in 1837. Fall 2022 enrollment was just over 1,900. Davidson meets 100% of financial need of students. Average class size 17, student faculty ratio is 9-to-1. Our full-time and part-time faculty total is just over 200, and we have 31 majors and 38 minors, as well as 5 pre-professional programs. And that will be important to understand as we move into what this particular report is going to do. So click.
And before I click to the next slide, I'm a Davidson alum, so I have to mention, we're also the alma mater of Stephen Curry, the greatest of all time. But I also want to mention that we've got, some really great majors and minors here, like data science. We're one of probably the few liberal arts colleges of our size that has a data science program. So anyway, just love to plug that, and on to the next slide.
Very good.
Thanks for indulging me.
No problem. I'm glad to. Anyhow, good points to make. Anyhow, where this started, this program, this idea, this report started was last summer, not this, a summer a year ago. At the beginning of the summer, I was contacted by a couple of different faculty members asking for some information regarding students after they've graduated. Where did they go on? What kind of degrees did they get after they left Davidson? And because I was getting it from a couple different sectors, I thought, I wonder if this is going to be something that is really needed beyond just these couple of faculty members. So what I did was I reached out to what was then our grants and contracts team. It's now the Office of Sponsored Programs. And asked them and said, okay, I've had these couple of requests. Is this going to be something that others would need for them, for their grants as they make applications? And they were very much excited about the possibility of getting something like I was describing. Then I also had a discussion with our executive director of career development, and she also expressed interest in seeing what we could provide, because she saw the need for what that would help build and give them some insights for where students go. Once I had done this and realized, okay, this is a project to move forward. At the time, I was a 1-person in a 2-person office, and the end wasn't in sight, and realized that I was going to need some help building the Power BI part. So fortunately, Pete graciously agreed to help me with that. And so therefore, we move forward. All right, click. And so then, I sent a data request to NSC. And what I did was we decided we wanted to do this for 20 years of Davidson graduates. And so just to be a little bit more expansive, I decided to go from January 2000 forward. And so that meant that there was just over 10,000 graduates that I sent information on to NSC. And what I got in return was just over 59,000 rows of student data, which gave us attendance data for over 6,000 distinct students. Now that included both attendance and degree completion information, because when we first started this project, we were thinking we would have an attendance piece as well as a completions piece. Well, after talking to some of our folks when we did our first initial draft of the report, they said they weren't very interested in the attendance at that point in time. We're still leaving that on the back burner and may add it in at a different time. But going forward, we're going to talk just about those degree completions. So click. So therefore, we moved on to variable selection. And from the NSC data that was returned to us, one of the things, of course, we needed was the Davidson ID, which is the requested return item that I provided to NSC for them to return so that we could tie it to the Davidson information very readily. But along with that, the college name of where they graduated from, whether they graduated, yes or no, the graduation date, the degree title, and the degree major. Now, the thing is, with the degree major, there's so many different ways that the titles were given that we had to do a little bit of work cleaning, but there were also some that were missing. And so imputations were used if they were missing. And I believe Pete's going to share with you what exactly he did to help fill in some of those missing pieces. But then from Davidson, of course, that Davidson ID, their first major, and if they had a second major, we also pulled that in, and their Davidson graduation date. Click. Okay, so data cleaning. I mentioned that it's pretty messy. Well, I have a question. How many ways do you think there were to label that an MBA degree? Well, would you believe there were over 40? Click. Here's just a few of them. And so this is, there were over 40 just for MBA. So you can click and let's move on. And so with that, the degree title that we took, that we're talking about, was it an associate's, was it a bachelor's, etc. We took those and we combined, and again, there were many different namings for those. And so we merged those all into just 6 categories: certificate, associate, bachelor's, post-bachelor's, master, and then we put professional degrees and doctorate into one. And then also the degree major, again, we got some help with this and getting it cleaned up because there were so many different ways that majors were labeled. And so we needed to clean that up so it became something useful. Also then with the Davidson data, in those 20 years, there have been changes in the names of the programs or the majors and the zip codes that were used. So we merged and again cleaned that up. And then also with regard to Davidson grad date, we changed that to the grad year. And then we used that along with the completion date from NSC to calculate the time to degree. All right, click.
Actually, Laura, we have a question from Edwin. He's asking, how was the data requested from NSC? Was this using Student Tracker or a special request submitted to NSC?
Yes, very good question. It was an FTP request, and so they have a way that you put in the data, and so you put together and they're very specific format, and if you don't have it exactly right, it'll be rejected and you make changes. But it's an FTP. So basically, I built it in Excel, and then you have to save it as a tab delimited file, and then you share that and drop that into the FTP. Hope that answered your question. Okay. If not, ask, and I'll move, give you some more information on that. All right, so help from others. As I noted, we did get some help in-house. We did some, naming and IHE identification, degree major. I mentioned those. Also, we got some help from NSC in terms of a crosswalk. Unfortunately, we didn't hear about that until after we had done a lot of the work, but it did give us some confirmation that some of the things that we were doing were correct, but it also gave us a few things that we had not considered. All right, degree major to post-Davidson majors for NSC, again, in-house. We did a sort to get common names, to get the same majors, but then we asked for some help from the VPAA and the Senior Associate Dean for Faculty to review the work that we did, and in terms of putting those names and cleaning it up and categorizing and pulling it together. And they made some changes, and if they were unsure, they asked some of the chairs. So we ended up with what I think is pretty much a very clean, as much as we could, data set for doing this report. One of the things that I thought was interesting is the VPAA identified and shared with me that she thought this was a fun and thought-provoking exercise. So click. All right, so again, feedback, then mid-production and post-production. The VPAA office and the Office of Sponsored Programs, we asked them to review it. And this is where they asked us to add in the number of grads for Davidson majors. You'll see that addition on the last page of the report, which I think was a great suggestion. They gave us some more suggestions on cleaning up the majors and zip changes, and also provided some future filters for that they suggested, which are STEM, non-STEM, natural science, humanities, and social science. And then at the very end, after we got it where we really felt like we wanted it to be, we pulled in from senior leadership requested invitees. And the feedback that we got was, this is very useful. They had some additional ideas on how they would use it. And the biggest question we got was, how do we access this so we can use it? All right, click. All right. So then, now that you have a sense of what we did, process, let me talk about how we took that information and moved it to the report. So when Pete and I were ready to start building the report, he said he knew I had this idea in my head, and he said, okay, draw up what you want. And this is what are called wireframes. And so this gave us a starting place for what the final report would look like. And the idea behind those wireframes is we were wanting to make sure that the construction, that was the content per page, was very focused. We wanted to identify which filters we would use on each page and what order the pages should fall in. And so we were looking for this to be a very intuitive app-like experience. So now I get to turn it over to Pete.
All right, thanks, Laura. Appreciate that. Nice handoff. So let's talk first about the Power BI development process. What this looked like for Davidson, we've already done a lot of manual data munging by this point. Now, Laura has gone in and updated a lot of that raw data to make it conform to the requirements from our users. But now we have to take that data and put it into Power BI. And that starts with the data preparation. The way I did this was using a Power BI data flow in the cloud. If you're not familiar with data flows, it's basically Power Query, but in the cloud. So we do our usual process of connecting to data sources, extracting the data, transforming it, and then loading it into some destination. In this case, we're just connecting to the Excel file that was handed off from NSC and that had our edits in it. And then we use that data flow to clean the data up and impute those missing degree information fields where possible. And I'll walk you through that in just a moment. It's pretty somewhat elaborate. Second step is data modeling in Power BI Desktop. So once the data flow is built, we connect to the output of the data flow, retrieve those tables, do any final transformations and filtering, and then we create the actual table relationships. And we define our measures using the DAX formula language. And then finally, we have data visualization in Power BI Desktop. We've created our data model, we have our measures, we have our table relationships. Now let's build the pages. Let's try to create that app-like experience for our end users. Let's add page navigators so that they can go between the various pages. And then let's add annotations. Let's give them some documentation that explains what is on each page and help them understand what's going on inside of the data. So, Power BI data flows, I mentioned a second ago, data preparation in the cloud. We uploaded the raw graduates data from the National Student Clearinghouse. We uploaded the crosswalk tables from NSC and also our own proprietary crosswalk tables. Then we connect to Davidson's Enterprise Data Warehouse for supplemental data about the students, namely their grad year and their majors, which is obviously not data that NSC is going to provide for us. And those are their Davidson majors, by the way. Davidson graduate years, Davidson majors. And then finally, we funnel that data through several stages inside of the data flow. We remove any extraneous columns that we don't need. We set the column names, the data types. And then, as Laura mentioned a minute ago, we're going to use the data flow to impute that missing degree information. There are a lot of gaps in that NSC data. So I used data flows to try and arrive at our best possible guess at what those missing values should be based on other values in the data. And then finally, we merge all that data together from the different sources into the final data set. Now, here's what that data flow looks like, starting from the left and moving from the right. On the left is the file that we upload from the NSC, and then moving from left to right, we're going to funnel that data through these various steps. And the end output is going to be the NSC graduated table that you see on the far right of this diagram. This is the diagram view inside of Power Query Online in the Power BI service. So, step one, or rather, according to my image here, step 0. Raw data from NSC, upload that. Step 1, filter on the graduate records only. We talked earlier about how messy the enrollment records were, so we decided to siphon those off to somewhere else. So we're filtering on the grad records, we're removing those extraneous columns, and we're setting the data types. That leaves us with 6,611 grad records as our starting number. Now, step 2. We're going to split those grad records based on whether they are missing degree information. So you can see that I take the grad table here consisting of 6,600 people, and it splits off into one table that's degree missing and another table that is degree not missing. The ones that are not missing degree information, the ones that are missing degree information are 788, or roughly 12% of the data that we brought in. And what we're going to do is, in order to impute those missing values, we're going to merge those two queries back together, joining records where the person, the institution, and the grad year are equal, and use that to impute missing values. So in other words, if we have a person who, we have a record that they attended UNC Chapel Hill, and they're the same person and they have a grad year, but maybe the degree information is missing, then we can guess based on the commonality of person, institution, and grad year that this degree information here can be used to fill in the missing degree information from the other record. And that produces a 389 records that are now missing degree info. So by taking this little technique of taking degree missing data and degree not missing data and using that to impute missing values, we were able to get down to only 389 records that were missing degree information, or less than 6% of what we started with, which I thought was pretty good. And then finally, we're going to integrate all of that data together with data from our other sources. We talked about the crosswalk tables that we got from the NSC, as well as our own proprietary crosswalk tables. And then we're going to produce the final data set that you can see here called NSC graduated. We also siphoned off a little table in the bottom right corner called degree still missing. Those are the ones that we just could not find a match for using our methods. We might try to fix it later, but we were pretty happy with only having a few hundred people still missing degree information at that point, and we felt like we could move on to the fun part, which was actually visualizing the data. What you see in front of you is what the end data model looks like in Power BI. Starting in the left, you have a couple of dimension tables that allow us to slice and dice the data model by time and by the degree levels. We have a bridge table called Davidson Majors, which allows us to get anyone who's got multiple majors are now accounted for using this bridge table. So Major 1 and Major 2 are unpivoted, and that creates, as you can see in my diagram, a many-to-many relationship from the Davidson Majors to the NSC graduated table. And then finally, there's a measures table that exists only for the purpose of storing and organizing measures. If you're not familiar with that, a measure table is literally just an empty table in Power BI, but when you attach your measures to that empty table, it becomes what Microsoft calls a measure table, and it has its own special icon and all these things. And it's not connected to anything else in the data model because it doesn't need to be. It just exists independently only for the purpose of storing and organizing your measures. So enough screenshots. Let's actually take a look at the report itself in Power BI. I'm going to open up our Power BI service, and this is the final product that we created. Tell you what, I'll even go into full screen mode if I can here. That'll be a little bit better. So what you see is the home page of the report. This is the landing page where everyone's going to end up on upon first accessing the report. There's a lot of information here. We wanted to put the documentation, as much of the documentation up front as we could, so that people could understand the purpose of the report, what information it's supposed to impart, explanation of terminology, and give them some links to documentation, including a video tutorial. And also let them know where the data comes from. So we, in the bottom center area, we've got a list of our data sources and attribution to both the College Office of Institutional Research and my department, Technology and Innovation, which is the central IT office. But front and center on this page is the table of contents, which is just a button navigator in Power BI that lists all of the pages that are available, as well as a list of the questions that are asked on each page. So on the home page, what is the purpose of the report? What do the terms mean? How do they differ? What are the data sources? And we'll use the table of contents then to move on to degree levels by time. And I see Doug. Hello, Doug at Elon. I will answer your question about Purview when I get done, but that's a good question. So the first question, degree levels by time. This is taking our data and looking at the degrees obtained by our Davidson graduates within a certain number of years of graduating. And you can see at the top of our visual, front and center on this page, is the question, how long after graduation from Davidson did our graduates complete other degrees? So we have it broken down by degree level, from certificate to professional doctoral, and we have it bucketed by within 5 years, 6 to 10 years, 11 to 15 years, and so on. Remember that we are only pulling in data within the last 20 years, so our analysis stops at the 16 to 20-year window. Below that, we've got a column chart that nicely shows that distribution of the graduates from year to year. And we can see that we've also got some slicers on the left-hand side that allow us to look at different grad years and different majors. So if we want to look at, for instance, what degrees people with an anthropology major at Davidson went on to obtain, we can filter on anthropology and see that we tend to funnel people into a master's or professional doctoral program. Now, what might be really interesting is if we look at biology and what people end up doing there. And we see a lot of people going on to master's and professional degrees, but there's also a decent number going into certificate programs and bachelor's programs. And we'll kind of dig into that a little bit more in a minute as well. There is a button here to clear all slicers. So if I have a major selected and I have a class year selected, I can then hit that button to clear all of the slicers and return us to our normal state. So this is just a matrix visual that presents our data, and then directly below that matrix is a out-of-the-box column chart. There's nothing here that's third party. This is all, just out-of-the-box Power BI stuff. The button navigator that you see along the top is a standard page navigator that you can use inside Power BI, and it just allows our users to go seamlessly from page to page to page within the report. So the next page is post-Davidson majors by time. And this page asks us, what majors did our graduates complete and how long did they do so after graduating from Davidson? So I will take my graduating year at Davidson, which is 2007, and analyze that one in particular. And I will sort by grand total in descending order. And we can see that a lot of folks went into, and this is pretty typical of Davidson grads, law school, medical school being a close second, MBA programs being a very close third. And we had a lot of people going to teaching programs and masters in political science and so forth. If I clear that filter, we can also see kind of the distribution, again, of when these folks are obtaining these degrees after graduation. So, and then again, this can be sorted alphabetically or by the grand total of users. The next page is post-Davidson majors by degree level. And notice how when I move between pages, the slicers on the left-hand side stay in the same position, but they if a particular slicer is not relevant to this page, we actually hide it from the page so it's not visible. We want our users kind of using only the slicers that we think will give them the best information. So this next page asks us, for a given degree level, what majors did our graduates complete after Davidson? So these are the actual courses of study that these students are going on to focus in. So, obviously we've got law and medicine and MBA programs up front. We also have a ton of people going into education programs. And what you may also notice, if we focus in on a bachelor's degree, so maybe the question is, why are Davidson students going on to obtain another bachelor's degree after they leave our institution? What are these folks majoring in when they do this? So if we filter on bachelor's degree and look at that, we can see that the vast majority of these folks are going into nursing programs. And this was this shined a big light for us internally, the fact that we have a lot of people going into nursing programs, but we don't actually have a nursing program ourselves here. And so there's been some discussion internally about, well, should Davidson offer a nursing curriculum? We have a program that offers, it's called our 3-2 program. You study at Davidson for 3 years and you study at an engineering school for 3 years. And as a result, you end up with a Davidson degree in engineering, basically. And we're kind of considering, okay, should we maybe have a 3-2 nursing program where you can study at Davidson, then go to a nursing school and walk out with a nursing degree, so this generated a lot of really interesting questions for us as a liberal arts institution, especially looking at where our graduates are going after they leave Davidson. So I'll move on to the next page, which is institutions by outcome. And there were a lot of kind of expected answers here. We know that typically Davidson graduates are going to end up at UNC Chapel Hill, Duke, Wake Forest, UVA, the usual suspects for us, Vanderbilt, Columbia, Georgetown, and so on. But we were also kind of curious, what institutions do they end up in, do they end up at when they're perhaps majoring in a particular field or doing a particular degree level? So bachelor's degrees, for instance, and post-baccalaureate stuff. If we filter on those particular degree levels, we see that we ended up with 13 people at VCU. Now, the caveat to this is that all this NSC data is self-reported by these institutions. So does this necessarily mean that Davidson graduates who are going into post-bac programs just overwhelmingly prefer VCU for those programs? Well, not necessarily. It could just be that VCU does a really good job of reporting that data to the NSC, and that's what we're getting back. So we do have to take the NSC data with a pretty big grain of salt along some of these lines, but it was kind of interesting to look at this and see how many people are ending up at these institutions doing post-baccalaureate programs and what that might mean for Davidson and our future curriculum choices. The last page of the report is Davidson majors by outcomes. And this is where it gets a little more interesting, because now we're asking ourselves, for our graduates completing additional degrees, what Davidson major or majors did they earn? And this is, again, another matrix. And what we have on the left-hand side of that dark gray bar, is we have the Davidson data, the data that comes from our institutional data sources. And on the right-hand side of that gray line, you have the data coming from NSC. And so we have, just to try and translate this, 1,300 Davidson graduates in the last 20 years earning a degree in political science, who then 483 of those folks then go on to obtain some other degree that was reported to the NSC. And the number of degrees that they earned is 562. So 583 graduated from some program, 562 degrees were earned by those 1,298 people. So it gives us a sense of so for some of our majors, which ones are sending most or a predominant amount of their people onto some of these graduate programs. And what I really like about this matrix is this sparkline visual that shows us kind of how the enrollment for majors in those different programs has trended over time. So using English as an example, English is the fourth most popular major at Davidson in this 20-year period. But if you notice when you look at the spark line, English enrollment or English majors are trending downward. And if we hover over that spark line, it's supposed to give me a tooltip that tells me the percentage, but it's not doing that, so that's a little disappointing. But the red dot on the left end of that spark line is the high water mark for English majors. So what that's telling us is that the most majors that we had were kind of back at the early part of this analysis, probably around 2004. And ever since then, we've been kind of trending down in English majors, and the same thing for history majors. But if we look at, for instance, computer science, I'll filter in ascending order here. If we look at computer science, this is a very new major at Davidson. Computer science has only existed for maybe 6 or 7 years, but you can see that there's been, according to the spark line, a pretty stratospheric increase. Like that is definitely one of the more popular majors just in the last 5 years, even though it's still very, very new. But the spark line kind of gives us that idea of the progression of majors over time. How are they trending in terms of the number of students declaring a major in those disciplines, and then kind of where those folks are ending up. And again, using the slicers, you can analyze this by the post-Davidson degree levels. So we can look at professional doctoral degrees. If we look at professional doctoral, you can see that people going on professional doctoral tend to come from our biology department or political science or history, psychology as well. So there's a lot that can potentially be gleaned from all of this filtering and all of this data that we have inside of this report. And so we've distributed this to a pretty large, we've distributed it to maybe, I'm going to say 30 people around campus, primarily in academic affairs, some faculty, department chairs, and so forth. And it's generating a lot of questions. We've even shown it to folks in our career services office. Admissions has been very interested in this as well, and kind of what it indicates for what Davidson students go on to study when they leave, and kind of what degree levels they're obtaining. So all of this put into one Power BI report, trying to design this app-like experience for our users. So we've got one more slide, and I'm going to transition back to that and let Laura take us out and talk about next steps.
Thanks, Pete. Now you guys understand why I wanted him to come in and help me build this, because he is fantastic at doing this. So next steps. So the data is clean and it's available for other analyses. So we have been sharing it with others within Davidson to use and add to and join with their data. But some possible future changes and additions, we're looking at adding some single filter selections to avoid small m, such as diversity indicators, health status, first generation, sex, gender, and some of the others that I had mentioned earlier. And again, we're going to put these in so that they can only do one and not multiple of these selections, filter selections, at the same time, just so that the students cannot be identified by putting in too many of those selections. So had a question from Miguel from Texas A&M International, wanting to know, is this a dashboard we intend to update periodically? And the answer is yes. We intend to update this every year and only keeping it as a 20-year. So when we update it for this year, which we're looking at probably early spring semester, so January, February, what we're going to do is drop off the most distant year and add in the next year. And so there will always be 20 years worth of data and maintain that 20-year span. And so the thing that Pete and I need to figure out is how we're going to take the NSC data that comes in and make sure that we're not overlapping, the overlaps are not are taken care of. So we haven't addressed that piece yet. So stay tuned. We'll let you know how that works out. Maybe we'll do a presentation in the spring and share with you how we figured out how to do that. Hope I've answered your question again.
All right, all done? All right, so at this point, I do have an open question from Doug Purnell that I want to address. And before I do that, I just want to get myself back in order here. So if you have questions, put them in the chat window, please. We'll have some time for open discussion and Q&A in a moment. So if you have questions, put them in the chat window. I'm going to answer Doug's question. He asked, are you taking advantage of Microsoft Purview for data lineage and or data governance? And the answer is no, we are not taking advantage of Microsoft Purview. I am very interested in Purview, though. We don't currently have a sufficient Microsoft 365 subscription at Davidson to use Purview. I think we're like one level below. I think you have to have like an E1 subscription or something. I think we're one level below that or something. I could have that totally wrong, but we don't currently have it. I'm very interested in it, especially since we are a Power BI school and Purview does have the ability to scan your entire Power BI tenant to get data lineage stuff. I'm very interested in that, as well as the data governance features, things like being able to label reports and tables as being, having FERPA data, having HIPAA data, or maybe just having a certain data type. Those sensitivity labels, as Microsoft calls them, I think are going to be huge, and I want to try and find a way to take advantage of them. Right now, though, my efforts are focused on trying to get Davidson into Power BI Premium capacity, and then I'll see if I can get Purview after that. Next question we have from Julia is, are you building BI reports dashboards over live databases or some sort of warehoused data / databases? Good question. So it's primarily over data warehouses and operating data stores or ODSs. Davidson has an enterprise data warehouse built and maintained by yours truly on Microsoft SQL Server. We also have the Banner operating data store on our Banner environment. Banner is our student information system and our financial aid system, and it's going to be our finance and HR system until December 24th. And then we're transitioning over to Oracle for ERP and HCM. But we primarily use data that's brought out of the source systems and into an ODS or data warehouse. There are some cases where we are using Power BI against the actual Banner production database or other production sources, but those instances are few and far between. I don't consider those to be best practice connecting to live data like that. However, I've been willing to flex on that in certain cases. And the good news there is that Power BI gives us some really great tools that help mitigate some of my security concerns with that, particularly things like data flows and direct query mode. I think, a well-designed report against Banner database, shouldn't be either a performance impact or a security issue if it's well-designed. So that's kind of how we primarily do it here, data warehouses and so forth. Interesting note, though, we are going to be looking at Microsoft Fabric in the very near future as a possible replacement for things like the Banner ODS and the Enterprise Data Warehouse, because Microsoft Fabric does have a built-in lakehouse and data warehouse architecture that looks to me to be very appealing and very affordable as well. So we're going to be looking at Microsoft Fabric, and who knows, there might be some really good presentations in this user group before long on that very same topic. And are there any other questions? Chat window. If not, what we can do is actually, I'll one more time post the links that I had for our chat window. And looks like we have a question from Judy. Judy, I'll post the links in here and then I'll address your questions. So give me one moment. Reposting those links. So Judy asks, we're using SQL Server Management Studio to create our queries in T-SQL, Visual Studio to build our reports from the SQL queries, and SQL Server Reporting Services 2019 to deploy our reports. Our next upgrade will be to Power BI. Using an on-prem Power BI report server, what applications are others using to build reports? I'll actually try to address that from the, and actually I think I just replied, I sent the links to only Julia, sorry about that. I'll send the links to everybody this time. And then I will address Judy's question about Power BI report server. So Davidson currently uses both Power BI report server and the Power BI service. So we have 1 foot in the cloud and 1 foot behind our firewall. And we're using Power BI Desktop to build reports for the cloud and reports on premises. I don't know if you were at the start of the meeting, Judy, but there are 2 different versions of Power BI Desktop, one for the cloud and one that is optimized for the report server version. So you have to, if you're in a hybrid environment where you're doing both cloud reporting and on-prem reporting, you have to have one version of each installed on your machine so you can deploy Power BI reports both on-prem and in the cloud. And if you're using Visual Studio, which is good, I use Visual Studio as well. If you're doing any report server reporting, then your SSRS reports, your paginated reports, can go into that Visual Studio solution. And I've done a lot with that over the years. I've even got DevOps pipelines that will automatically deploy SSRS reports to our Power BI report server on premises. The holdback there is that you can't put Power BI reports into a Visual Studio solution. And if you're aware of how Power BI works, PBIX files also don't really work well with version control systems. There have been some recent advancements from Microsoft on the version control front. In particular, there's now a feature called Power BI Developer Mode, which is also called Power BI Projects, where you can take a Power BI PBIX file made in Power BI Desktop, and you can save it in a particular format called a Power BI project or PBIP format. And what that does is it actually takes the PBIX file and it breaks it down into its components, into the dataset layer in one subfolder and the report layer in a separate subfolder. And that actually allows you to see all of the individual components in line-by-line code. And that makes it a lot easier to do version control, which is one thing that people, enterprise IT shops, definitely, covet. I love that stuff. And then for developing paginated reports in the cloud using Power BI Report Builder. So I'll put a link to Power BI Report Builder in the chat where you can download that. But it is, it's the same report builder that we've been using for Microsoft SSRS reports since 2005. Pretty much. It's pretty much the same report builder since 2005. The technology has barely changed at all. It's still that XML report file, report definition. And it really has changed very little other than that Power BI reports in the cloud have the ability, I'm going to stop sharing because I'm just sharing a blank screen at this point, but Power BI reports in the cloud, obviously have the ability to connect to Power BI data sets in the cloud. So it's a little bit different from the on-prem reporting, on-prem paginated reporting, but you can still use Visual Studio for your on-prem stuff. But once you get to the cloud, it's Power BI Desktop and Power BI Report Builder. And as I mentioned earlier, there have been a lot of advancements in just the past 3 months on version control and automating deployments for the Power BI cloud. So hopefully more to come on that front. I'm going to actually unmute now, and I'm going to let people unmute themselves. And if anyone has any open Q&A at this point, feel free to unmute yourself and ask questions. I'd be very curious to keep this going in the little bit of time that we have left.
Hey, Pete, this is Doug. Nice job today. It was good.
Thanks, Doug. Good to virtually see you again. I think I saw you at the PASS Summit in Seattle.
Yep.
Seattle. So
good. Yeah.
Glad to have you here.
it's Jenny. I was just going to say it was great to see how you displayed your clearinghouse data. It's very different from how I build out my clearinghouse dashboards, and it's really interesting to get a different take on it.
I would be very interested to see yours at some point, Jenny, because I think that, I mean, I had a lot of fun at yesterday's meeting, by the way. I would be very interested to see what you have there, if it's okay to share it, of course. But yeah, collaborating on how to present NSC data, very valuable.
Absolutely. Be happy to share it.
While we wait for anyone else to unmute themselves, I'll also say, remember to use those links and RSVP for the October meeting. We don't have a subject yet, but I do know that I have gotten at least one submission already for topics or speakers. So I'd love to get some more ideas. Particularly, we did a survey of the people who RSVP'd for this meeting a couple weeks ago, and it came back. There seemed to be a lot of Power BI beginners, a lot of institutions that are just getting started in their Power BI journey. So what we may end up focusing on is going to be some advice on Power BI implementation, the do's and don'ts of building a good Power BI architecture and data governance scheme in Power BI, because Lord knows, like Davidson, we did not do it right when we first got started. I mean, I just kind of got thrown into the deep end and I had to figure it out on my own. And we made a lot of mistakes. And especially with having one foot in the report server and one foot in the cloud, we definitely made a lot of mistakes, because one of the limitations of Power BI report server is that the ratio of data sets to reports is 1-to-1. There is no concept of a shared data set on Power BI report server, which means you end up with a lot of redundant data sets. Whereas in the Power BI service in the cloud, you can create shared data sets where you have one data set that is hosted in a workspace, and then people can go in and they can create reports off of that, multiple reports using a single consolidated data set with consolidated business logic and consolidated documentation. And because we started out using Power BI report server primarily, we were stuck on that 1-to-1 data set to report ratio model. And that ended up really messing us up, because now we've got so many redundant data sets that we have to find a way to unwind. And we're having to refactor a lot of our Power BI architecture as we try to move to the cloud. So that's been a big sticking point for us. I'm just going through messages right now. Someone who saw our presentation at AAR. So thanks for coming back. I hope you don't mind doing the reprise. And we've got some other suggestions. Love to see a hands-on session where we can all build a Power BI dashboard. That's a good idea, like kind of a, build your own at the meeting or even beforehand, and kind of do a show and tell. I love that idea. Ask a question: would you be willing to give a talk on your SSRS migration, specifically showing migrating detailed reports to Power BI? Sure, that's a good one. Please put that in the Google form. Let me know, and just so I don't forget. But yeah, migrating old SSRS reports to Power BI report server or to a full-fledged Power BI report. A lot of lessons learned from that as well. There's a lot of temptation for people to take the original SQL code and just copy and paste it into Power BI. And I really encourage people not to do that. Try to build a star schema data model if you can. Getting great feedback. Very thankful for all of this. And we even have someone who's moving from Tableau to Power BI, or going to a new institution that's using Power BI after using Tableau. Good luck. I actually used Tableau first. I was a Tableau developer for a few years before starting with Power BI, and it's definitely a transition. Well, anyway, thanks everyone for coming. I don't think we have any more questions at this point. Sign up for the next meeting in October. We'd love to have you. Please volunteer to speak if you're interested. Please submit ideas for topics and speakers. We'd love to have active participation from everyone in this user group. And thank you so much for your feedback on the chat. I've really enjoyed doing this. This is a breath of fresh air after the week that I've had. So again, thanks so much. And hopefully I will see you again in October. And also stay on the lookout for a message from me through meetup.com, where I'll send out links and a thank you to everyone for attending. So take care of yourselves, and I will see you at the next one.